Hi, and welcome to Career Mobility with James McIlvena it's actually for March, actually, James, March, and we're getting towards the end of it, but there's a reason why we've left it a little bit late, but I'm going to talk about that in a moment. How are you and how you've been doing?
Yeah, doing really well, thank you.
Fantastic. Well, look, March has been a really interesting month, at LHH, lots happening, lots of activities happening for career seekers and people into career transition. So we're coming to this session having delivered last week our Global Connect Forum, which is an amazing array of events that happen all around the globe. We delivered a number here in the ANZ region, and I really want to talk with you, James, some of the themes that came up from those sessions, and some of the things that people are really have on their mind at the moment. So I think this is going to be really key for people in career transition now and as they move forward into 2026. So the sorts of things we're going to talk about certainly talk to identity, confidence, and the emotional reality of career transition. We're going to talk about the perfect role trap and how to create momentum in job search. Also, visibility and being seen, that sort of thing without feeling like you're too exposed or it's uncomfortable. So we're going to talk a bit about that. Networking as connection, definitely not as transaction. So we really, want to talk to that one. And also very much about resilience and just having that energy to stay the course and get really on, where you want to get at the end of that. So lots of really great things there. But yeah, got some great questions for you, James. So are you ready?
Ready to go.
Perfect. All right. So the first one I'd love to, just sort of as an opener, when you look at the market right now, James, what feels most different for people in career transition, do you think, compared to previous years?
I think it's the requirement to need to look more broadly at what is going to be the next step for them. So we are seeing in our data the fact that people need to look at what we've been referring to as career pivots, which is it's no longer a get me the same job with a higher salary, please, but thinking more broadly, far from being something a few people would do if they were dissatisfied or looking at transition as an opportunity. It now almost becomes an imperative to help people get the outcome that they're after. And funnily enough, I've just attended, 2 days last week in Singapore in a course that was about AI, and it
Yeah.
was about leadership of AI. And one of the key topics of discussion was the fact that there's the term now used AI washing, which is effectively where they're blaming a whole bunch of job reductions on the introduction of AI and the requirement of people to think differently about the jobs of the future.
Yeah.
Um, and that is something that's really important for people to take into consideration, right? So it's those pivots of what I need to do differently and look at differently, but then also which are the most sustainable jobs.
Yeah, brilliant. I think that's a really good opener, actually. And the other question I had for you, but again, this may also talk to pivoting. When it comes to what are clients most surprised by, do you think, or unprepared for now in 2026 when they enter career transition?
It's part, but I'll expand on the pivoting thing as to what they're most surprised about. I think they're most surprised about the fact that with a bit of help and support, and this is at the very core of why career transition support is so critical and important. The ability to get access to the tools and to have a discussion with the coach to think about how you can invest time. And you can actually really do quite a lot when it comes to particularly upskilling. Reskilling is a much more intensive exercise, but from an upskilling to add a few extra strings to the bow before starting the job search and the networking discussions
Yeah.
really isn't as big a lift as most people think it is. And the key thing is getting started and doing something, which I know we've discussed in the past. So that would be the biggest thing is with the appropriate support, making a start on upskilling is really not that difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. You just need the right tools, and certainly able to provide a lot of those for people, that's for sure. So let's get into the first one. So we're talking about identity, confidence, and the emotional reality of career transition. So what do you think, James? What is the career transition? Why does it hit people so hard? at an identity level. When the truth is, it's not personal, even though it may feel like that.
Yeah. Look, I think part of the answer is in the question. It is that sense of identity that is
Yeah,
wrapped up in a working life. But even more than that, it's like colleagues who we've grown really close to that we enjoy interacting with. And so even if people take that it's not personal, and I don't necessarily 100% agree that people think that it's not personal, it's very hard for it not to feel
yeah,
personal, particularly in instances where it isn't a complete closure. So, anytime there is a selection of a subset of people and a subset of people remain, that's one of the first things is people would need to get over the why me thing unless they've opted in. They need to
yeah,
get over the why me thing, and I think they're probably owed an answer if it isn't provided to them. If it isn't, they're struggling with it. Then it's important to have that discussion with the coach. But it's not personal, and the fastest thing I can do is think about the proactive actions they can make. It is great to acknowledge the feelings. It's great to discuss the feelings, but it's
yeah,
also good to, at the same time, be having an eye on the future and regaining that control of what you can do.
yeah, absolutely. So, what do you notice happens though from an identity perspective when someone hasn't yet separated sort of who they are from the role that they've lost? What sort of shows up there, James?
The inability to, either in networking discussions or if they're on a shorter timeline and they're discussing specific roles, it's the inability to fully leave the past in the past. And it can be very detrimental to be discussing the prior role or the circumstances in which the displacement occurred until you've come to terms with it and until you're ready to tell your story and you've thought it through. So it's the it's the still emotional reaction that can creep into discussions, which is probably the biggest thing to watch out for there if it hasn't been left in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what helps people rebuild that confidence, do you think? Before they feel sort of clear and then ready to move forward?
It starts with that ability to think about some positive actions they can take, that wrestling back of control. This isn't something that happened, and it can very much feel like it. So it can feel like this is something that's happened to me. I didn't do anything wrong. I was performing well in my role. And all of these things are often true. So that sense of a loss of control and then regaining control is my number one thing there around, okay, so what are some things I can do? Can I build out a roadmap of how I'm going to approach this? How do I discuss with my coach, even if it's the first steps, if it's not a full roadmap? How do I get back to sort of structuring my week in a way that is productive,
Yeah,
and thinking of the job search like you think of approaching a job where you actually have some clearly structured time, some clear downtime, because you don't want to get sucked up in job applications or networking discussions 8 hours a
yeah.
day every day. But getting back to approaching it like like a job, which it pretty much is. It's the job of finding your next career step.
Yeah, it is, and it definitely can be consuming in that sense for sure. But I mean, I think the thing is, obviously, people have the permission to feel what they feel. The important thing is to rebuild that confidence, and then obviously get that clarity, so they know where they're headed, which is great. So let's then look at the perfect role trap. We were talking about this a little bit earlier, and how do you create momentum? Because in this market, it is a challenge. Do you take the first role that comes, or do you kind of stick for what you want? And I think, I mean, I personally, if you can, I love seeing people who love what they do, but I know that that's not always possible, and obviously there are sometimes things in play. So, how often do you think you see clients sort of just waiting to find that perfect role, and what's the impact?
More often than not, like I tend to speak to people who are exiting sort of senior and executive roles, and
Yeah.
two things are at play there. One, it is a much more sparse job market. The amount of opportunities that come along are less regular. But then, secondly, the gravity of the decision that's being made feels significantly higher in regards to what they're going to take and waiting out that perfect role. I think at any level, though, not senior level role, there is a clear, almost a mental hurdle for a lot of people where one of the outcomes they really want to achieve is whatever I do next must be a permanent role and it must be better than the role that I last had. Um,
Yeah.
and that's even internally, people who are not going through outplacement, even internally these days, actually thinking more laterally about how you build a really successful long term career path and taking, not necessarily saying people need to downgrade their expectations, but sometimes taking a sideward step with like a clear strategic goal because you're going to learn something or acquire knowledge or do something that's closer to your passion or your values um, is much more beneficial than sort of holding out for that perfect role that needs to be better in your head than the role you've just exited.
Absolutely. It can be a bit limiting almost, can't it? Because then, yeah, there are certain things that literally you're just going to close down without even giving that perhaps the due sort of diligence and thought. How do you think then someone can distinguish between, a strategic next role or settling? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think one of the big things is thinking that the next role must be permanent.
Yeah.
It's a really good start point when it comes to thinking about whether a role might be strategic. So if there is something to be gained, then ruling it out, even a permanent role that you think might not be an 100% fit for you, an honest discussion about whether fulfilling that role as a contract for a period of time or getting some learning or thinking about fulfilling that role in a more flexible way, to balance out, I think has merit. I think a lot of the limiting factor is just see the role for the way it is advertised. And
Yeah.
sometimes all it takes is an additional discussion to figure out whether there's both parties come to an agreement that suits them, because that's ultimately what any discussion about a new role is. It's both parties having a discussion. The employer has a particular need to be met and the employee has a need to be met. Those needs are not just limited to the salary they draw, it's the learning they have, it's the safety they feel, it's the sense of fulfillment they feel, and on the employer side, they've got to receive a certain outcome when it comes to sort of knowledge, skills, and value to the business. So I think it's just having that additional discussion around trying to meet in the middle rather than ruling things out too early.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. So in that case, obviously the job market has changed. There are other ways to engage other than permanent roles. So, what role now do lateral or interim or progress roles play into the market, do you think? Have they changed things up?
Yeah. So the two biggest trends we're seeing, one is interim placements. Particularly where there might not be. I mean, let's face it, the world is in a high degree of uncertainty on
Yeah,
a number of different levels at the moment,
yeah.
both economic, geopolitical,
Mm,
and I think that because of that, one of the things that people are saying is there's like less certainty to commit to roles. And so the ability to actually do things on an interim level, particularly suggesting if you're looking at proactively engaging in discussions through networking about, potential suitable roles where they don't exist, and suggesting that that might start as an interim assignment so that both sides get that sort of proof of this is a great match is
yeah.
a great way to go. The second key trend is portfolio careers, where
Mm,
people then look at the fact that a role doesn't have to be a 5-day-a-week role to work? So can it be something where it's not a full-time role, on the employer side? The individual can still fulfill the needs of that role, and they might have a secondary revenue stream or a side hustle, or actually use the opportunity to have more flexibility in their life and do some, non-paid passion projects or some care responsibilities alongside it.
Yeah.
So thinking more broadly from a portfolio career standpoint when it comes to having two or three things that fulfill your week rather than one single role or one single full-time role.
Yeah, I love that. I think as well, it takes the pressure off a little bit. It's like, the job market has changed so much that it's like, permanent roles aren't necessarily and definitely not the only way to be employed anymore. Everything has definitely changed. So it's really just getting that momentum and perhaps, yeah, just looking in other areas which may not have been perhaps open before or even considered.
And maybe it's the industry we're in, DJ, but there really needs to be some consideration to the naming of a role as a permanent role, because it might be there's no such thing as a permanent role anymore. And in fact, like
So true.
the duration of permanent roles is constantly
Yeah.
getting shorter and shorter.
Yeah, that's actually, that is very true. The sort of idea of sort of full-time heads, if you like. Yeah, it's like it's all changed. So let's chat now about visibility and being seen. We know, and I mean, I have this discussion very regularly. Not everybody feels comfortable with this, so it's a bit like networking used to be. Being seen is now the new awkward. So we want to address some of those opportunity blockers, basically. So the questions I have for you, James, is why do you think visibility is so critical for people right now, especially for people in transition?
Yeah, for people in transition, but everyone, is that now that secondary referencing of individuals. So whether that's secondary referencing primarily, LinkedIn, the world's largest professional social media platform. But that's secondary, like, oh, okay, just met DJ, what do I do next? I probably do a Google search and check out LinkedIn. All right, and LinkedIn
Yep.
will normally be the number one thing that'll pop up if I did a Google search anyway. And so that visibility component, if they go and they find nothing, like no views, no posts, no anything, that's can be quite damaging in an instance where I'm checking two or three different profiles and someone else actually is seen to like and comment, things that align to values or industry knowledge or
Yeah.
conferences or any of that stuff. This is way short of needing to go and create your own content. This is actually just having a degree of activity to increase your visibility. So there are some low barrier to entry things people can do to increase their visibility without having to go out and write a whole ton of content and speak at conferences.
Yeah.
Particularly the introverts, who are listening to this going, "Oh, I go, that just sounds having to do that stuff just sounds awful. Like, don't even ask me to do that." Extroverts, maybe like you go for that stuff, but everyone, like, I think it's about having a plan and finding out and discussing with your coach, what you feel comfortable with, versus just shunning it and doing nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to your point there also that, now there is that just no, it's known that if someone is going, you're going to meet someone or someone's going to meet you, they're going to go and check you out. It's like, and there's nothing weird or strange about it. It's just, we want to understand a little bit about that human. And when you go and look at LinkedIn, for me, I mean, obviously I do it very regularly and sort of, help people also start to really embrace, I guess, their personal brand and things like that. But it's so wonderful, I think, when you can learn so much about someone so quickly. And to me, when people do comment or they do write posts, etc., you can literally hear their voice in what they share. And you do start to get a sense of who that person is in a business context. And I think it's incredibly powerful. And like you say, there's some minimal ways you can do that, like commenting as an example strategically. I now, James, think it's as powerful as, sort of going to a networking meeting. One, because you can go directly to the person you actually want to speak to. If you tag them, it's like shaking your hand saying, "Hi, James, love what you've written there." I feel the same way about that topic, for example. But you can do that with people in talent acquisition or, in peer group level, but you get on their radar. And I think that's really important. If you tag people, you start to get in a conversation with them. And I think COVID transformed that, but it's become so powerful. So yeah, so I absolutely agree. What do you think though is the biggest misconception that people would have in transition about LinkedIn or personal branding? What do you think sits there? What is the concern?
Well, look, I think you've just touched on one of them, which is the fact that the barrier to doing something very intentional and very meaningful and very strategic is not that massive. And picking up from that point of strategic commenting with someone tagged in, not only does it give you the handshake introduction, it gives you
Yeah,
your first topic of discussion. And that first topic of discussion is, I need you to help me find a job. That first topic of discussion is like an alignment on values or approach
yeah,
towards
yeah.
a very relevant topic, a very relevant professional topic, not just we like the same football team. And so, I mean, that's like such a great head start. I think the other one, when it comes to people's presence, is that just making sure that your profile is appropriate, up to date, has appropriate. And the amount of times you go and do that sort of quick check, um, and there's just some basic hygiene factors that aren't there and should be there. So before getting into it, there is so many things. There's specific information, in our Career Studio platform around making sure that you actually have done those hygiene factors and you have a very good looking, up to date, optimized profile before you start taking the activity.
I have an extra one to add to that, James, and it's, the idea of, I think some people get really caught in what they were and they're really struggling to work out who they are now. And one of the, I guess, nuggets of a little that I've heard around is that sort of idea of being deliberately contemporary, like be relevant now. Kind of doesn't matter what you've done. Obviously, bring that with you, but make sure that it makes sense now in the way that you're putting yourself across. So yeah, love that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about networking, because we can do that certainly on LinkedIn and things like that. But networking is definitely something that enables us to make connections, and I talk about it very much as having conversations, building relationships. It's really that sort of simple. But at the same time, we know it can be, as I say, it's like the old awkward instead of the new awkward, which is that kind of idea of visibility. So why do you think networking still feels so uncomfortable for so many people who are in transition?
I think this one's a really simple answer. Uh, in that most people look at networking as a catching up with someone to ask for a job
Yeah,
because they're in transition. And it is so much more subtle. It's so much more complex than that. And we just discussed it's actually about finding common ground first. And it is incredibly daunting. If I was thinking about networking as going to a meeting for asking someone for a job, like that would freak me out. Uh,
fair enough.
it needs to be way more subtle than that. Then it becomes
Yeah,
way less daunting. Then it becomes easier to start. And then when it
yeah.
starts and you have some positive discussions, that helps build momentum. And then it becomes much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think effective network actually looks like in practice today, James?
Well, I think it can start from that type of thing where it begins with an outreach over something that is common and shared. So whether that's a tagged comment from a viewpoint in LinkedIn, whether that's being diligent enough to follow up after a conference you attended, or a alumni event that you've attended, or a random catch up as you pass someone. If you're actually going into the office, you spot an ex-colleague in the city. They're small little fractional things, but they're a golden opportunity with a bit of diligence to turn that into a discussion that's not a daunting discussion. It's
Yeah.
catch up, discuss all of the changes that have gone on with your prior employee. It's a discussion around a topic that's been raised. It's a discussion about a particularly great speaker that you both might have witnessed because you attended the same conference. Any of those things can just be like a really, really easy and impactful start point. And if the discussion doesn't flow and it doesn't go beyond that, great. Finish with asking people, who else they might know if they're in a employer that you're looking to target, where there are other introductions that can be made. That's when you can get more specific at the end. But the gently approach to networking tends to work significantly better on both sides.
Yeah. The other thing as well, James, I was going to ask you, how do you mention there about like that whole thing? People tend to get very nervous, I think, as you say, because what's on their mind is they're thinking about asking for a job, essentially. But that's not necessarily going to get them the kind of conversation and really information that perhaps they're looking for. So the marketing plan, I'm a massive fan, and I think I've said it a number of times in our sessions, but that plan, having that with you and actually being able to demonstrate, as a result of what's on your plan there, what you've been up to, who you've been talking to, the sorts of information you're finding out, what you're still looking to learn about. I think it's just such a brilliant way to map your journey and, again, excite people about the fact that you're really excited about your own job search. And if you're interested, they're going to get really interested too.
That and add to that, any learning or upskilling you've completed recently and what you thought of it.
Yeah.
And so couldn't agree more. It gives you some structure. You don't have to shoehorn, hey, and by the way, now it's time for you to listen to my marketing plan. It just gives you some sort of anchors to weave into a discussion naturally. And I think the other thing is it's the intentional follow-up. So while the barrier to entry and the fear factor of having the discussions is lower if you structure it in this way, it also requires higher diligence when it comes to follow-up to move yourself closer to how did this take me one step closer to a potential discussion, which will result in a investigation of whether a role exists. So it does require some very specific and intentional follow-up at the end. Otherwise, you're just going to have a ton of lovely discussions about relevant topics, which in and of themselves can be enough. But if that's all you're doing, then it's not unearthing any opportunities. So it's then figuring which ones might unearth a future opportunity and being very intentional at the end. Is it a further introduction? Is it you work your way towards getting comfortable to ask, whether there's any opportunities or whether there's an internal recruiter that you could be introduced to, rather than you having to reach out yourself. Are there other people within their network? Or sometimes it is just that it's finding out more information about the business, the context, everything that's going on that could be used in an interview for a application if it results in getting you to interview. So any of these can be great outcomes in and of themselves, just not forgetting I came here for a reason and I'm going to remember follow up by saying thank you and figuring out what the request is for the next step.
Yeah, one of the ways I think is lovely to follow up if you're connected to someone, and of course if you're meeting with someone, it's a brilliant opportunity to do that connection on something like a LinkedIn. Is just send a quick voice note. They're very quick on LinkedIn, but again, it just shows that intentional, and kind of, that level of emotion and sort of, genuine thank you, which is sometimes, different to a note and stands out. So on that then, James, we've talked about, identity, we've talked about branding, we've talked about, being able to sort of stay the course. So resilience is something that we know that people need to do that. So having the resilience energy to stay the course. So what, how do you think people can manage the sort of emotional highs and lows when it comes to sort of feeling like, progress can feel slow sometimes in this market. So how should they be managing that, do you think?
Yeah, I don't think it's massively different to how you manage your emotional state in any other time in your life. In the roles people have, in my role, like you have your good weeks, you have your not so good weeks. And so you just figure out those routines that work for you.
Mm,
And when I mentioned before, it's actually treating the outplacement and whatever's next. So if that's a job search, or whether that's a transition to retirement, or whether that's a setting up of a new business for yourself, whatever it is, like keep those same routines in place. So if that's you draw your energy from always allowing and carving out time to go to the gym, keep that in
mm,
place. If it's important to have lunch and go for a walk every day, keep that in place. Keep those same great routines that have served you well.
yeah,
But do think about, because it is a more highly emotive time for people, do think about ramping those things up if you're struggling, particularly if you're not having much progress. If you feel like you've had a bad week in outplacement, it's probably even more severe than feeling like you've had a bad week at work. So use the routines you already have, but just ramp them up a bit. Remember to be kind to yourself. Yeah. We know that everyone ends up finding an outcome. It's
yep.
just a matter of time. Figure out the weeks where you need to give yourself permission uh, to look after yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I may have been in the pool this morning, James, and kicked out a kilometre, about 41,
Nice.
41 laps this morning, and yeah, then took the dog for a walk.
and
So
and
yeah,
and it's all those things, and it's so personal for people as to what works for them. Just don't forget to build it in, and deliberately build it in. Carve out the
yeah,
time for it.
awesome. So simple routines and structures, definitely make the biggest difference over time. So love that, and ensure that you're keeping that within your process. So, how do we kind of like round this off, James? So, how do you think we can help clients recognize progress when they don't yet have an offer? What can be maybe the milestones that you can suggest that they can just kind of go, what, I'm there. So, I mean, I have an offer yet, but I'm here. I've done this.
Yeah, I mean, you referenced before the marketing plan that we talk to everyone about is not a static document. It
Yeah.
tells the story of, this is what I've achieved, this is what I've done, this is how I've updated things, this is what I've learnt. Um,
Yes.
these are the courses I've done, these are the interventions. So it's reminding yourself of the process. It's almost like if you're preparing for a triathlon and you do a training log, and it's the
Yeah.
event is not there yet, if we call the
Yeah.
placement or the outcome as the event. So it's all those
Mm,
little steps, all of those wins, all of those things, recording a best time for your kilometer swim, whatever that might be. Make sure those things are documented. They should be forming part of your marketing plan, but it's good to be able to do that self reflection. And if you
yeah.
are struggling and feeling like you're not getting benefit, like those basic gratitude things of, rather than getting into a negative spiral, like thinking
Yeah.
as you start your day, which is going to make you much more effective for anything you do in your search on that particular day. Think about three things that have gone particularly well in the last week, 2 weeks,
Yeah.
which are going to put you in the right mindset anyway.
So that's a great point. So what would you say would be perhaps the invisible wins that people just kind of, let pass them by that they'd see before they actually get their new job that they could then start to become more present to?
Yeah, it might be, I have updated and now have like a great base version of my CV. It's like optimized to get through the AI selection screening. It's a base level document that I can now amend for specific applications. Like tip, that's one. It might be like a fantastic networking meeting, that people have had and go, right, bang, and I've done my follow up, and that's one new network in the bank
Yeah.
that I've achieved. It might be the ability to just get like a number of job applications in play and begin tracking them. Whether those job applications come through networking or through application. Reflecting on the fact that there's a pipeline there for you to be able to continue working through, and even if there's delays or there's silence or you're waiting what seems like a inordinately long time between a first and second interview, like all of those things help you come back to the activities taken, and they're all the small wins that people need to be celebrating along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. You mentioned earlier about documenting things, and I think sometimes people's LinkedIn, as an example, can be like night and day from when they first started working on it. And if it is, and the wonderful thing about if you're active, you start to see the story, your own story that you're narrating, almost evolving. And it's just all of those things. But I agree with you so much. So there's so many little things that you can do that are moving you in the right direction. As long as you're doing little things, it's amazing. You'll get where you're going. And as you said, James, everybody lands. So that's the great thing. So if you could leave our listeners today with just one belief or one action to focus on this week, what would it be?
Yeah. I think it is the fact that the right outcome, the best outcome, will come from continuous effort momentum. So the ability to acknowledge the times when you haven't moved on from your prior role and think about, okay, so what are the actions I'm going to take in order to be able to help me process those feelings? When are the times that I feel like I need to ramp up my well-being and my self-care throughout this journey? And taking appropriate actions there. And please, if anyone is struggling, do make sure you chat to your coach immediately. There's a range of things we can support you with. But making sure that that's acknowledged and something is done about it rather than letting it spiral. Making sure it's like the intentional actions when your networking gets humming around, sort of following up and having a degree of rigor and tracking what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yeah.
It's not one single thing. It is the cumulative effect of a range of small actions which create the right outcome, and acknowledge when you're stuck and figure out whether that being stuck just requires giving yourself a break or giving yourself a couple of days off, but then reattacking it with vigor when you get cracking again. But stagnation will be the enemy, as it is for anyone in anything, not just working through a career transition.
Yeah, words of wisdom indeed. Well, thank you so much, James. That was a really, really sort of fun discussion. And look, there's a lot to look back on, I think, when people go back in and perhaps have a listen to this session. Make sure they sort of really think through each of those areas, but just make progress. I think that's the main thing. And, know that you're heading in the right direction, but there's definitely support available for you. So thank you so much, James, as always. We will be back next month in April and probably post Easter. Hopefully you don't eat too much chocolate. We'll see you on
anything. Can't promise anything about the eating of the chocolate, but no, I'm looking forward to catch up in April.
We'll definitely be doing an Easter hunt. I know that much. But yeah, have a fantastic one and definitely look forward to seeing you later on in Easter. Later on in April, I should say. See you then. Cheers.